Hello everyone. The first topic that we will be covering is taking a look back through time to figure out what on earth instructional design is, because it's an important element of learning technologies. It has a much older history than I think most realize, and it dates back to the early 1900s when schools first started to become, I guess, institutionalized the way they are now in an organizational structure. Because what happened is we went from the little one-room schoolhouse or homeschooling, because most of the families were rural and we were a very agrarian society. But as the Industrial Revolution started to take hold in the late 1800s and into the early 1900s, there was a migration towards more urban settings or towns even, and all of a sudden there were large groups of children, and that's when we started to see education the way it currently is, where it's in a classroom setting and it's separated by grades and there's subjects and all of that kind of piece. And we're not going to go into the whole piece behind the curriculum area, but it became a practice of study in watching the different types of technologies that have been introduced. So even things like the blackboard and chalk is technically considered a technology. More importantly, what we start to look at it is with the invention of radio and film in the early part of the 20th century. So we can see that educational technology, which is also part of, you're going to hear lots of terms: learning technologies, learning sciences, instructional design, and educational technology. Sometimes they can be used interchangeably if you were following them more intensely as an area of learning, such as the degree that I have pursued, which is learning technologies as a whole. We actually start to define these each a little bit differently. But educational technology, we are going to be using this kind of interchangeably with learning technology. Educational technology, learning technology, right? It is defined by the Association for Educational Communications and Technologies, or AECT, which is a professional organization, as the study and ethical practice of facilitating learning and improving performance by creating, using, and managing appropriate technological processes and resources. So the processes and resources is a really important piece, because you will see that learning technologies or educational technology is not simply the technology. There is also the process that goes behind it of integrating it, or of understanding how people learn, and therefore developing what we're going to do in the second part of the summer session is the process of building a learning module by understanding how people learn and progress and go through these steps. So what we are going to do is we're going to read the first couple of chapters in our textbook that talk about this history. And the authors of our textbook, Robert Reiser and John Dempsey, have actually written fairly extensively on the history, particularly Robert Reiser. So these first couple of chapters will be pretty detailed, and it'll take you through some of the history and some of the key elements and points in time that spurred on changes. But the other theme that you're going to see, and this relates to one of the discussion questions this week, is practically every new big technology. So from the motion picture to radio to television to the computer has been, somebody somewhere has proclaimed it will be the thing that revolutionizes education, and it will completely change the way we do education. So that will be one of the discussion questions, so just to think about that. And so I pulled a few quotes out of there. Seymour Papert was not in the readings, but he shows up in some of our other readings, and he had said something a bit more recently in 1984 when personal computers started showing up in the classroom about how that was going to change. Also, part of this history is looking at instructional design. Now, whereas learning technology, or part of that is the learning sciences, that was really that first part, is how do people learn? That's the development of these theories. Well, instructional design is the development of certain types of models that people have created that analyze how people learn and then in turn design, develop, and implement that in some sort of like a learning module that can work with learners of all ages and all skill sets to solve those problems. So that might be in a classroom or it might be in a corporate training setting. Many of you may be familiar already with one of the most prominent models, which is called ADDIE, which is analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. We will be talking about that a little bit later in the summer session. But that's part of what instructional design does. So you're going to be reading about that. And one of the big ones that you're going to pull out of that is Bloom's taxonomy. I have a small illustration here. When Benjamin Bloom, when Benjamin Bloom came up with this, he basically talks about that just like with Maslow's hierarchy, which was also that pyramid where we have to have some basic needs taken care of before we can move to the next one up to self-actualization. Well, in this case, we're talking about some really basic concepts. Remembering and recall. So those in education is oftentimes skill and drill. It's learning the terms and the technology, or the terms and kind of the glossary of what we're going to be using. And then it works its way all the way up into more advanced skills and advanced understanding and deeper learning that happens. And that's by being able to analyze, evaluate, and create up at the very top of that pyramid. So that's some of what you're going to find out in the readings for this week. I do have some links to some professional organizations. Let's just take a look at the discussion questions that go with this. The reflection questions are going to be in the history of instructional design. Let's go here. So there are a couple of questions, and I want you to respond to each of those. And the first one is, it seems that every time a new technology takes the public by storm, someone is there to say it will change education in revolutionary ways. Will the impact of media on instruction be greater in the future than it has been in the past? And when I'm saying media, I am talking the different types of technology. I'm not talking about the news media. I am looking at, if you think paper is a media or medium that you can use, that textbooks are, that over the course of history, again, that motion picture, that radio, that film, computers, the internet, all of those pieces are different types of media. So think about, will the impact of media on instruction be greater in the future than it has been in the past? Why or why not? And then the second question is, online learning, such as you're doing right now, has become a popular option for students around the world. But to be effective, those who design online courses need to consider additional elements. They cannot simply try to replicate what happens in a face-to-face class. And what are some things that need to be considered when creating an online learning environment? So think about that based on the histories and your own experiences of what are some things that instructors and instructional designers need to think about when creating an online class versus a face-to-face class. And you will notice I have 2 due dates for this. This is going to be very common for most of our discussion posts. The first post will be due no later than Friday at 11:59 p.m. And this then gives all of our classmates a couple of days to read through what everybody has said and respond, so that you have Saturday and Sunday in which to respond before the final day of class. So initial post is due Friday, June 15th, then respond to at least 2 of your classmates by Sunday, June 17th. If you went through the syllabus, you will know that I want to see a couple of things: that you have read the readings and that you have applied some reflection and thought to your responses. So I don't want to see really brief responses of, yeah, I agree with that. I want you to really think about them and respond in analytical ways. apply those critical thinking skills and give some really thoughtful responses. So that is what we're covering. Let me just get back to our content page. So that is this history of instructional design, our first main topic for this week. With that, I will see you online. Thank you.